The ceremonial chambers beneath the coral palace had never felt so cold. Zethra Mineth pressed her webbed fingers against the smooth mother-of-pearl walls, feeling the vibrations of the ocean currents far above. Her gills fluttered with each shallow breath, betraying the anxiety she fought to contain. The bioluminescent patterns along her neck and arms pulsed in deep purples and blues, colors that any nereid could read as distress and shame. The human delegation arrives within the tide cycle, announced Elder Corveth, his ancient voice echoing through the chamber's curved acoustics. His own markings remained steady gold, the color of unwavering authority. House Minetha's debts will be settled through this union, and our people's honor preserved. Zethra's throat contracted as she swallowed back bitter words. Honor. As if there was any honor left in her family name after the disasters that had befallen them. The failed deep-sea mining operation that had poisoned 3 coral cities. Her brother's gambling debts to off-world traders. Her father's desperate political maneuvering that had ultimately led to his exile to the outer trenches. I understand my duty, Elder, she managed, though the words tasted like the bitter kelp that grew in the deep places where sunlight never reached. But must it be a human? Surely among the allied species. The humans offered the most generous terms, Corveth interrupted, his scarred fins cutting through the water with dismissive efficiency. They require a bride of noble lineage to cement their terraforming contracts with our world. You are the last unmarried daughter of a recognized house. The mathematics are simple. Simple. Nothing about this felt simple to Zethra. She had spent her 26 cycles studying the delicate ecosystems of nereid oceans, learning how to nurture coral gardens and guide the migration patterns of the great CWIRMS. Her dreams had been filled with restoration projects and healing the damage her family had inadvertently caused. Instead, she would be shipped off-world to be some human's exotic wife, a living symbol of interspecies cooperation. The elder gestured to his aide, who swam forward carrying a sealed biocase. Your intended's cultural profile and biological compatibility assessments. The human goes by Marcus Rivera, age 31 in their counting. He works in something called terraforming, manipulating planetary environments. At least he works with environments, Zethra thought as she accepted the case. Perhaps they might have that much in common, though she doubted a human could truly understand the subtle harmonies that governed oceanic life. The ceremony will follow modified traditions, Corveth continued. Human customs forbid our traditional bonding pools, so it will be conducted in atmosphere. You will need to practice breathing air for extended periods. The thought made Zethra's gills clench reflexively. Air breathing was possible for nereids, but profoundly uncomfortable, like trying to swim through liquid stone. Everything about this arrangement seemed designed to strip away her natural advantages and comfort. May I ask, why did he agree to this arrangement, she ventured, genuinely curious despite her resentment. Humans typically mate for emotional attachment, do they not? The elder's markings shifted to a cooler blue, mild amusement. Their diplomatic core was vague on specifics. Something about building bridges between worlds and advancing his career in xenobiology. Perhaps he seeks the novelty of an alien bride, or perhaps he calculates that our alliance serves his species' expansion interests. Both possibilities made Zethra's patterns flare with indignant orange. To be chosen for novelty or political advancement, it was hardly flattering. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that her intended might have read her published research on coral restoration or shown interest in her actual capabilities rather than her exotic nature. There is one more matter, Corveth said, his tone becoming more formal. The human government has requested that you maintain certain presentations during your marriage. They find our bioluminescent displays fascinating and believe they will help humanize our species to their populations. Humanize. Zethra's patterns blazed with deep red now, pure anger. We are to be a spectacle then. A pretty light show to make their people more comfortable with our existence. You are to be an ambassador, the elder corrected sharply. Your marriage represents more than a personal union. The terraforming contracts your husband's people offer could transform the dead zones in our outer oceans. Millions of Nereids could benefit from restored habitats. Your sacrifice serves the greater tide. The greater tide. It was an old Nereid saying about individual sacrifice for collective survival, usually invoked when someone was being asked to do something they desperately didn't want to do. Zethra had heard it used to justify everything from dangerous deep-sea mining to sending their young warriors to fight in the intersystem conflicts. "I will do my duty," she said finally, though the words felt like swallowing sea glass. "When do I leave?" 3 tide cycles hence. Use the time to study your intended and prepare yourself mentally. The human marriage customs are different from ours. After the elder dismissed her, Zethra swam slowly through the palace corridors toward her family's former quarters. The spaces felt hollow now, stripped of the personal belongings that had been sold to pay debts. Only her research materials remained, carefully preserved in bio-sealed containers. She activated the cultural profile case in the privacy of her chambers, watching as holographic data streams filled the water around her. Marcus Rivera appeared as a three-dimensional image, tall by human standards, with dark hair and what she supposed was an aesthetically pleasing facial structure according to his species' preferences. His eyes were a deep brown, almost black, and held an intensity that suggested intelligence. His professional record was impressive, she had to admit. Advanced degrees in xenobiology and environmental engineering, successful projects on 4 different worlds, specializations in aquatic ecosystem restoration. At least he wasn't completely ignorant of her field. But what struck her most was a small notation in his personal file: volunteer status confirmed. Subject requested assignment to interspecies cultural exchange program. He had volunteered. Not been assigned or commanded, but actually chosen this path. The information puzzled her. Why would a successful human engineer volunteer to marry a stranger from another species? What could he possibly gain from such an arrangement? She studied his image more carefully, trying to read something in those dark eyes that might give her a clue to his motivations. His expression was serious but not unkind, professional but with hints of something else, curiosity, perhaps. Or simply the polite mask that all diplomats wore when being recorded. The biocompatibility assessments were reassuring, at least. Despite their different evolutionary paths, Nereids and humans were physically compatible for cohabitation. She wouldn't need extensive medical modifications, though she would need atmospheric breathing apparatus for their home world. Their home world. The phrase sent a chill through her patterns, shifting them to deep blue-green, the color of profound change. She was truly leaving everything she had ever known. That night, Zethra swam to the observation dome at the palace's highest point, where she could see the lights of the coral cities spreading across the ocean floor below. Bioluminescent gardens created rivers of blue and gold through the darkness, while transport currents carried Nereids through the water in graceful arcing patterns. It was beautiful, her world, her people, her life. In 3 days, she would breathe air instead of water, walk on solid ground instead of swimming through 3-dimensional space, and share her existence with a being whose biology and culture were alien to everything she understood. But perhaps, she thought as she watched the ancient CWIRMS glide past the dome with their own hypnotic light patterns, perhaps this human called Marcus Rivera might surprise her. His research credentials suggested a mind capable of understanding complex ecosystems. His volunteer status implied motivations beyond simple political advantage. And if she was going to sacrifice her old life for her people's benefit, she might as well try to make something meaningful from the arrangement. After all, both their species seemed to share at least one thing: the desire to heal damaged worlds. The thought didn't make her patterns shift to warmer colors, but it did steady them. Zethra Mineth had never been one to accept defeat easily, and she wouldn't start now. If she was to be an ambassador between worlds, she would be an effective one. If she was to be married to a stranger, she would learn everything she could about him first. And if Marcus Rivera thought he was gaining a decorative alien bride to advance his career, he was about to discover that Nereid nobility came with depths he might not have anticipated. The CWIRMS sang their ancient songs in the distance, and Zethra began to plan. Marcus Rivera stood at the observation deck of the orbital station, watching Neria's azure surface rotate slowly beneath him. The planet was breathtaking, vast oceans broken only by scattered island chains, with aurora-like displays dancing beneath the water where the Nereid cities pulsed with bioluminescent life. From space, it looked like a living jewel, and he found himself wondering what it would be like to dive beneath those waves and see the coral palaces he'd only read about in xenobiology journals. Having second thoughts, Marcus turned to find Captain Helena Voss approaching, her diplomatic corps uniform crisp despite the long journey from Earth. She carried herself with the professional ease of someone who had negotiated treaties across half the galaxy, but Marcus caught the hint of concern in her expression. "No," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Just processing." "It's not too late to withdraw," Helena said gently. "The Nereid delegation would understand if you chose to step back. Interspecies marriages are complex even under the best circumstances." Marcus shook his head, watching as one of Neria's 3 moons began to eclipse another. "I'm not backing out. This is exactly what I signed up for." That wasn't entirely accurate either. 6 months ago, when he'd first submitted his application to the Cultural Exchange Marriage Program, he'd been thinking primarily about the professional opportunities. The chance to work directly with Nereid environmental technology, to study their coral cultivation techniques firsthand, to potentially revolutionize terraforming practices across human space. But somewhere between submitting his application and standing here watching his future wife's world turn beneath him, the reality had become more personal. He was about to marry a complete stranger, a being from another species with her own thoughts, dreams, and feelings. A person, not just a research opportunity. "The psychological evaluations in your file suggest you're motivated by genuine scientific curiosity rather than exotic fascination," Helena continued. "That's good. The Nereids are extremely sensitive to being treated as spectacles or trophies." "I read Zethra Minetha's published work on oceanic restoration," Marcus said. "Her approach to coral symbiosis is brilliant. She's identified patterns in ecological recovery that we've completely missed in our terraforming models. If anything, I'm worried she'll find me intellectually inadequate." Helena raised an eyebrow. "That's not typically what grooms worry about." Marcus laughed, though it came out more nervous than he'd intended. "I suppose I'm not a typical groom. Look, Captain, I'll be honest, I've never been good at the emotional side of relationships. My ex-fiancée used to say I related better to ecosystems than to people. Maybe she was right. And you think marrying an alien will be easier?" "I think marrying someone who shares my professional interests might be easier than marrying someone who expects me to be something I'm not," Marcus replied. "At least with Zethra, we both understand going in that this is as much professional partnership as personal relationship." Helena was quiet for a moment, studying him with the sharp assessment of someone trained to read between diplomatic lines. "Marcus, I need to ask you something directly, and I need an honest answer. Are you doing this because you genuinely believe you can build something meaningful with this woman, or because you're avoiding the complexity of human relationships?" The question hit closer to home than Marcus cared to admit. His relationship history was a series of promising starts that fizzled when his partners realized he was more passionate about his work than about weekend getaways or romantic dinners. He'd always assumed he simply hadn't found the right person, but lately he'd begun to wonder if the problem was him. "Maybe both," he said finally. "But does the motivation matter if the outcome benefits everyone involved? The terraforming contracts this marriage enables will help both our species. And if Zethra and I can find common ground in our work, maybe that's enough foundation to build something real. Marriage isn't a research project, Marcus. No, but partnerships can be built on shared purpose as much as shared emotion. Maybe more successfully, sometimes." Helena sighed. "Just, promise me you'll remember that she's a person first, a colleague second, and a research subject never. The Nereid's bioluminescent displays aren't party tricks for your entertainment, they're involuntary emotional responses. Treat them with the respect you'd want for your own feelings." "I understand. Do you?" Because according to the cultural briefings, Zethra Mineth is essentially being sacrificed to pay her family's debts. She's leaving everything she's ever known to marry a stranger from another species. Whatever romantic notions you might have about interspecies cooperation, remember that from her perspective, this is probably the worst day of her life. The words sobered Marcus more than he expected. He'd been so focused on the scientific opportunities and the professional challenges that he'd somehow managed to intellectualize away the human, or rather, nereid, element of the situation. Zethra wasn't choosing this any more than he was, but her lack of choice was imposed by desperation rather than opportunity. "What do you know about her personally?" he asked. Helena consulted her data pad. 26 years old by nereid reckoning, which translates to roughly 32 human years. Noble lineage, though her family has fallen from grace due to some kind of environmental disaster they caused. She's got advanced degrees in marine biology and ecological restoration. Your research interests align well there. Unmarried, no previous long-term partnerships recorded. Why not? I mean, she's clearly intelligent, presumably attractive by nereid standards, well-educated. The file suggests she's been focused on her research to the exclusion of social relationships. Sound familiar? Marcus felt a wry smile tug at his lips. So we're both socially awkward scientists being married off for political convenience. There are worse foundations for a partnership. There are also better ones. Maybe. But at least we understand each other's priorities. The conversation was interrupted by an incoming communication alert. Helena activated the holodisplay, and a three-dimensional image of a nereid official materialized, an elderly male with elaborate golden patterns across his scaled skin. Captain Voss, Engineer Rivera, the figure intoned in carefully pronounced standard. I am Elder Corveth of the Nereid Council. I contact you to discuss final arrangements for the bonding ceremony. Elder Corveth, Helena replied with a diplomatic bow. We're honored by your communication. How may we assist? There are cultural considerations that must be addressed. The ceremony will be conducted in atmospheric conditions to accommodate human physiology, but certain nereid traditions must be observed. The bride will need to demonstrate her bioluminescent patterns as part of the bonding ritual. Marcus felt something twist in his stomach. Elder, if I may, I understand that bioluminescent displays are involuntary emotional responses for your people. Won't requiring a demonstration during the ceremony be uncomfortable for Zethra? The elder's patterns shifted slightly, a color change Marcus couldn't interpret. The display demonstrates the bride's health and fertility to both species. It is traditional. But traditions can be adapted, Marcus pressed, ignoring Helena's warning glance. If there are aspects of the ceremony that cause distress to either party, surely we can find alternatives that honor both cultures without compromising anyone's comfort. There was a long pause. When the elder spoke again, his tone was more measured. You show consideration for the bride's dignity. This is unexpected but welcome. We will discuss modifications to the ritual that preserve its meaning while respecting nereid emotional privacy. After the communication ended, Helena looked at Marcus with something approaching approval. That was well done. You may have just earned yourself some goodwill from your future wife. I meant what I said. If we're going to make this work, it has to be based on mutual respect, not cultural domination. And that, Helena said, is exactly the attitude that gives this arrangement a chance at success. That evening, Marcus retreated to his quarters to review the extensive cultural briefings one more time. Nereid psychology, their social structures, their environmental relationships, he absorbed it all with the same methodical approach he brought to studying new planetary ecosystems. But he found himself returning again and again to Zethra's research papers. Her work on coral restoration was genuinely innovative, combining biological insights with engineering solutions in ways that human terraformers had never considered. She wrote with passion and precision, and her theoretical frameworks showed a deep understanding of ecological interconnectedness that impressed him more each time he read it. He began drafting a message to her, something to break the ice before they met face to face. How did you introduce yourself to someone you'd never met but were about to marry? How did you bridge not just cultural differences but species barriers? Finally, he settled on directness. Scientists appreciated directness. Zethra Mineth, he began, speaking into the recording device. My name is Marcus Rivera. I wanted to reach out before our ceremony to establish some initial communication between us. I've been studying your published research on coral ecosystem restoration, and I'm genuinely impressed by your innovative approaches to symbiotic engineering. He paused, trying to find the right words. I know this arrangement isn't ideal for either of us. We're both being asked to build something personal from political necessity. But I believe we have enough common ground professionally to create a foundation for mutual respect and collaboration. I'm hoping that's enough to start with. Another pause. I want you to know that I volunteered for this program because I believe interspecies cooperation is essential for both our people's futures. I don't expect romance or emotional attachment, that's not why I'm here. But I do promise you partnership, respect for your expertise, and support for your continued research. Whatever we build together will be built as equals. He stopped the recording and reviewed it twice before deciding it struck the right tone. Professional but personal, honest without being presumptuous. It wasn't a love letter, but it wasn't meant to be. It was an offer of partnership from one scientist to another. As he transmitted the message toward Nerea, Marcus found himself genuinely curious about Zethra's response. Not nervous, exactly, but interested. For the first time since applying to the program, the woman he was about to marry felt like a real person rather than an abstract concept. And perhaps, he thought as he watched her world's distant glow through his viewport, that was enough foundation to build something meaningful after all. The first time Zethra saw Marcus in person, she was struck by how still he stood. Nereids were creatures of constant motion, even at rest, their fins moved with the subtle currents, their patterns shifted with passing thoughts. But Marcus held himself with an almost sculptural stillness that spoke of a different relationship with his environment. The ceremony had been mercifully brief, conducted in the atmospheric chambers of the orbital station with modifications that honored both cultures without forcing either into uncomfortable compromises. When the time came for the traditional joining of hands, Marcus had waited patiently for her to adjust her breathing apparatus and extend her webbed fingers first, a small courtesy that hadn't gone unnoticed. Now, 3 weeks into their marriage, they shared a residence on Kepler Station, a neutral diplomatic outpost that served as a halfway point between their worlds. The living space was a marvel of adaptive engineering, sections that could be flooded for Zethra's comfort alongside dry areas where Marcus could work without environmental suits. Their daily routine had evolved into a careful dance of consideration and avoidance. Marcus worked early shifts at the terraforming research facility, while Zethra spent her mornings in the aquatic laboratory studying coral samples from both their worlds. They shared meals in the evening, polite conversations about their respective projects, and maintained separate sleeping quarters. It was civilized. Professional. Utterly without warmth. The mineral composition of your world's coral substrates is fascinating, Marcus said over dinner, reviewing data on his tablet while picking at the hybrid cuisine they'd settled on, foods that satisfied both human and nereid nutritional needs without being actively unpleasant to either palate. The calcium carbonate matrices are more complex than anything we've documented, Zethra replied, her patterns shifting to the pale blue-green of intellectual engagement. It was one of the few emotional states she felt comfortable displaying around him. The symbiotic algae have evolved unique adaptations to your solar radiation patterns. I've been thinking about applications for the Titan 7 restoration project. If we could adapt your coral cultivation techniques to their atmospheric conditions. The pressure differentials would require significant modifications to the growth chambers, Zethra noted, warming to the subject despite herself. But the base principles should translate. The key is understanding the metabolic relationships between the coral and its symbiotic partners. This was safe territory, their work, their shared expertise. Here, they could talk for hours without the awkward silences that plagued their more personal interactions. Here, she could almost forget that she was an exile married to a stranger for political convenience. I received approval for the joint research proposal, Marcus said, setting down his tablet and looking at her directly. The Terraforming Commission wants to fund a pilot program combining your coral restoration techniques with our atmospheric processing technology. Zethra's patterns brightened involuntarily, genuine excitement breaking through her careful emotional control. They approved the hybrid system design. Not only approved it, they want us to head the project together. Co-primary investigators with full autonomy over methodology and implementation. For a moment, Zethra forgot her carefully maintained distance. Marcus, this is incredible. The applications alone could revolutionize ecosystem restoration across dozens of worlds. The energy efficiency improvements, the self-sustaining biological networks. She stopped abruptly, realizing her patterns had shifted to brilliant gold, the nereid color of pure joy and excitement. Marcus was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, and she felt suddenly exposed. I apologize, she said, her patterns dimming to neutral blue. I allowed my enthusiasm to overcome my discretion. Why are you apologizing? Marcus asked quietly. That's the first time I've seen you genuinely happy since we met. The observation stung more than she expected. Emotional displays are considered inappropriate in formal relationships among my people. This isn't formal, Marcus said. At least, it doesn't have to be. We're partners, Zethra. In work and in life, whether we chose it or not. I'd rather have an honest partner than a polite stranger. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. His dark eyes held an intensity she hadn't seen before, not the professional focus he brought to their work discussions, but something more personal. You find my emotional displays acceptable? She asked carefully. I find them beautiful, Marcus said simply. And informative. Your patterns tell me more about your thoughts than your words do sometimes. The admission made her patterns shift to soft pink, surprise mixed with something she didn't want to examine too closely. No one had ever called her emotional displays beautiful before. Among her own people, they were simply functional, communication tools no different from spoken language. But the way Marcus looked at them, studied them with scientific curiosity tempered by aesthetic appreciation. Perhaps, she said slowly, we could establish some guidelines for more informal interaction. I'd like that. Their breakthrough came 2 weeks later, when a crisis at the research facility forced them to work together more closely than ever before. A containment breach in the experimental coral cultivation tanks had released thousands of hybrid specimens into the station's water recycling system. Left unchecked, the aggressive hybrid strains could disrupt the entire environmental balance of the station. We need to neutralize the contamination without destroying the specimens, Marcus said, his usual calm cracking under the pressure. 3 days of research, gone if we have to flush the system. Not necessarily, Zethra said, her patterns shifting to the deep blue of intense concentration. If we can modify the water chemistry to encourage dormancy rather than growth. She was already moving toward the emergency controls, her webbed hands dancing across interfaces designed for human operation. Marcus watched in fascination as she adapted to the unfamiliar technology with fluid grace. The pH balance needs to shift by 0.7 units, she called out. Can you adjust the mineral content to compensate? On it, Marcus replied, falling into the rhythm of their collaboration. What about temperature regulation? Reduce by 4 degrees. The thermal shock should trigger protective hibernation responses. They worked in perfect synchronization, Zethra's intuitive understanding of biological systems complementing Marcus's engineering precision. Her patterns shifted constantly, deep blue concentration, bright yellow problem solving, flashes of orange when something went wrong and quick silver when she found solutions. Marcus found himself reading her emotional state as naturally as he would monitor system diagnostics, anticipating her needs and adjusting his own responses accordingly. When her patterns showed frustration, he offered alternative approaches. When they flashed with inspiration, he immediately began implementing her insights. It's working, Zethra breathed, watching as the coral specimens throughout the system began to retract into protective shells. Her patterns were brilliant gold again, pure triumph and joy. "We did it," Marcus said, and then, surprising himself, he reached out and gently touched her shoulder. Zethra went very still. Physical contact between Nereids was intimate, reserved for family and chosen partners. But Marcus's touch wasn't presumptuous or demanding, it was celebratory, collegial, warm. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I couldn't have solved this without you." "Nor I without you," she replied, not pulling away from his touch. "We make an effective team." "Yes," Marcus said, his hand still resting lightly on her shoulder. "We do." That evening, they shared dinner in the flooded section of their quarters, Marcus using his breathing apparatus so they could eat in Zethra's preferred environment. The conversation flowed more easily than it ever had before, professional shop talk gradually giving way to more personal observations. "I was terrified of this marriage," Zethra admitted, her patterns shifting to soft blue honesty. "Not of you specifically, but of losing myself in someone else's expectations. And now? Now I think perhaps I was terrified of the wrong thing. Partnership doesn't have to mean submission. It can mean enhancement. Two perspectives creating something neither could achieve alone." Marcus nodded slowly. "I've never been good at the emotional side of relationships. I tend to intellectualize everything, treat people like problems to be solved rather than individuals to be understood. Do you see me as a problem to be solved?" "No," Marcus said, considering the question seriously. "I see you as a mystery to be explored. Respectfully, carefully, but with genuine curiosity. Is that acceptable?" Zethra's patterns shifted to warm gold, amusement and affection. "It's very acceptable. In fact, it's rather perfect. I've spent my life being seen as either a political asset or a scientific curiosity. Being seen as a mystery to be explored, that suggests depth, complexity, worth. You have all of those things. As do you." She hesitated, then added, "I received a message from my former colleagues on Nerea today. They've been following our joint research publications. They're impressed with the progress we've made. Are you surprised?" "I'm surprised that it matters less than I expected. Their approval used to be everything to me. Now." She gestured around their shared space, at the hybrid technology that accommodated both their needs, at the comfortable intimacy they'd built together. "Now I think I'm building something new. Something that doesn't require external validation." Marcus smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed his usually serious features. "I know exactly what you mean." That night, for the first time since their marriage, they lingered after dinner, talking until the station's artificial night cycle dimmed the lights around them. Zethra's patterns cycled through soft blues and gentle golds, contentment, curiosity, and something else. Something that might have been the beginning of affection. When they finally parted for their separate quarters, Marcus hesitated at the threshold of his room. "Zethra?" "Yes." "Tomorrow, would you like to have breakfast together?" "Not because we have to, but because we want to." Her patterns brightened to warm gold. "I'd like that very much." As she settled into her sleeping pool that night, Zethra found herself thinking about the strange paths that had brought them together. Arranged marriage, political convenience, professional necessity, none of it had seemed like the foundation for anything meaningful. But perhaps meaning wasn't something you found ready-made. Perhaps it was something you built, day by day, choice by choice, with the right partner. And perhaps, just perhaps, she had found exactly the right partner in the most unexpected place. Her patterns settled into the deep blue-green of peaceful contemplation as she drifted toward sleep, dreaming of coral gardens that grew in impossible places, nurtured by the patient collaboration of two very different worlds.